The young and the restless spoilers, no one expected her to walk through those gilded doors, least of all Kyle. The party in Paris was supposed to be an exclusive gathering, part business summit, part intimate reunion for the players in Genoa City's ever-shifting corporate chess game. Chance and Kane had dominated the whispers thus far, with their blood revelations still echoing in every corridor. But all of it, the twin scandal, the suspicions, the fear of inheritance wars, was eclipsed the moment Summer stepped into the light, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor of the ballroom, her figure draped in winter white silk, and in her arms, a child. The room fell utterly silent. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The little girl in her arms, no older than 1, wore Kyle's eyes. His impossible mix of innocence and fire, the storm that always lingered behind that perfect jawline. Her presence was thunder. Her silence was lightning. And Summer? Once Genoa's golden girl, then its pariah, now stood tall, proud, and irrevocably changed. No longer the heartbroken socialite who had fled Genoa City in disgrace. She was a mother now. And her child was not a symbol of shame. She was a reckoning. Phyllis was the first to react. Her hands flew to her mouth, and her body shook with a sob that had been caged for far too long. She didn't need a DNA test, didn't need a birth certificate or a timeline. She knew her blood when she saw it. She stepped forward slowly, tearfully, reaching out as if afraid that even touching the baby might cause the moment to vanish. "She's mine," she whispered. But Summer didn't answer, her eyes fixed solely on Kyle, whose face had drained of color. Nick followed closely behind, his composure crumbling as he stared at the little girl. His mind flashed with the memory of Summer as a baby herself, the way he'd protected her against every storm, every threat, real or imagined. And now she had stood against one of her own, alone, in silence, in shame, carrying not just the burden of heartbreak, but of new life. He fell to his knees before his daughter, overcome, and for a moment, all he could do was cry. But Kyle remained frozen. His entire world collapsed inward. The perfectly aligned walls he built to contain his guilt and regret now cracked with violent precision. He had buried his feelings for Summer under layers of denial and distraction. After the affair, after the scandal, after Audra, he told himself that chapter was closed. But it wasn't. Not for Summer. And certainly not for the child she'd carried across the continent. "Is she?" His voice barely escaped. Summer's silence confirmed it. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run. But neither instinct prevailed. Instead, something heavier overtook him. He remembered the last night they were together. How cruel he had been in dismissing her, how quickly he had fled their shared memories, as if he could erase them by proximity. He had pushed her away, not because he stopped loving her, but because he feared what that love demanded: accountability, vulnerability, the very things he had always avoided. Now, standing in front of a daughter he never knew he had, he understood that fear had cost him something sacred. "You should have told me," he finally said, eyes red with fury and regret. "You should have told me the moment you knew." Summer looked down at the baby, now softly asleep against her chest, then back at him with eyes that carried the weight of every tear she had shed in Milan. "I wanted to," she said softly, but her voice was steel beneath the sorrow. "But you made sure I couldn't." It was the truth. After she left, Kyle had ignored every attempt at communication. He had changed numbers. Blocked accounts. Built walls so high that Summer had stopped trying to climb them. And when she found out she was pregnant, alone in a country that was not her own, she had no one to turn to. She gave birth without a father in the room. Without family. Without hope. But not without love. And as the weeks turned into months, and the baby's resemblance to Kyle became impossible to deny, Summer stopped waiting for him to come back. She chose to survive. Her pain wasn't a weapon. It was a testimony. And it was written in the way she held her daughter now, with the quiet ferocity of a woman who had loved enough to endure. She hadn't returned to Paris for revenge. She didn't need revenge. She had something far more powerful, the truth. And the truth, held in her arms, had silenced every critic, every rumor, every doubt. The guests murmured in stunned disbelief. Audra, watching from a darkened corner, clenched her wine glass until it cracked. Diane stood as if made of stone, calculating the fallout. Even Victor, who had been skeptical of Kane and Chance's bloodline twist, now found himself without words. Another Newman legacy revelation. Another child hidden in plain sight. Another future destabilized by secrets no one dared to confront, until now. Kyle took a step forward, then stopped. The distance between him and Summer felt longer than the years she'd been gone. But it wasn't just about crossing a room. It was about facing the chasm he had helped create. "What's her name?" he finally asked, his voice trembling. Summer met his gaze, then whispered, "Holland." The name hit him like a dagger wrapped in memory. It had been the name Summer once told him she would choose for a girl, back when they were still dreaming, still naive enough to believe love could survive Genoa City. He had forgotten. She hadn't. And now that dream had flesh and blood. Kyle broke. All the composure, all the rehearsed indifference, all the bitterness melted in a single moment. He approached slowly, eyes locked on Holland, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel everything, the guilt, the shame, the wonder, the awe. When Summer handed the baby to him without hesitation, the room collectively exhaled. Kyle cradled his daughter for the first time, and the weight of her small body shattered everything false inside him. "I'm sorry," he said through tears, not to Summer, not to the room, but to Holland. "I should have been there." Summer didn't reply. She didn't need to. The moment spoke louder than anything either of them could say. Later that evening, as the party continued with forced smiles and tense whispers, Summer stood on the balcony alone. Phyllis joined her, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "Even if it hurt." Summer nodded slowly, her eyes on Kyle, who now held Holland as if afraid to ever let her go. "I didn't come back for him," she said. "I came back for her." And yet, even as she said it, her heart ached in the way only unfinished love could. Because buried under the rubble of betrayal was a flicker of something still alive. Not trust. Not forgiveness. But the possibility of healing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. Let me know if you'd like the next chapter to explore Diane and Audra's reactions, Phyllis confronting Kyle, or even a custody battle over Holland. We can also link this to Victor's suspicion of family bloodlines, expanding the tension further. The room, once thick with tension, began to shift. The earlier gasps had given way to hushed murmurs and heavy stares. In that silence, raw emotion took the place of words, and the spectacle of scandal gave way to something far more profound. An unspoken understanding that lives were being rewritten before their eyes. Kyle stood still in the center, his arms cradling the child he never knew, the daughter whose very existence shattered the fragile narratives he'd clung to for so long. His hand gently supported the back of her head, his breath shallow with disbelief, his heart pounding beneath the weight of revelation and regret. The baby stirred softly against his chest, as if unconsciously responding to the father she had never met but somehow always known. Across the room, Audra collapsed into a chair, her face buried in trembling hands. The poised, calculating woman who had built her power on control now sat unraveling. The tears came in waves, silent at first, then gasping and broken. She had gambled everything on Kyle, not out of love, but because she had seen in him a path to permanent relevance, a way to bind herself to the Abbott name and the fortunes that flowed through it. But in the presence of Summer and the child, Audra realized she had never held his heart. She had only held his confusion, his loneliness, his attempts to escape. Now that clarity had found him, she was a ghost. Unwelcome. Redundant. And painfully replaceable. Claire, who had lingered quietly on the edge of the crowd, now stood stunned. Her hands clutched at the sides of her head, trying to silence the thoughts that screamed in every direction. She had only just begun to find her footing again, to feel seen and accepted, especially by Kyle, who had shown her something resembling tenderness. But that illusion cracked under the undeniable bond now unfolding in front of her. Claire's lip quivered as she took a single step back, eyes locked on the baby in Kyle's arms. "She's beautiful," she said softly, almost in reverence, then closed her eyes to keep the tears from falling. "But I guess this means I've lost my chance." Her voice broke on the final word. No one moved to stop her. No one had the words to soothe her. She turned slowly, then walked out through the grand doors of the ballroom, her departure quiet but devastating. A promise that never had a future. Kyle didn't move to follow. He couldn't. His legs were heavy, planted by the gravity of what had just occurred. As he looked down at his daughter, his voice cracked in a way it never had before. "This is my daughter," he said, aloud now, to everyone watching. His declaration wasn't defensive, it was a confession, a vow, a public reckoning. "I wasn't there when she was born. I didn't even know she existed. But I know now. And from this moment on, I will never let her go. I will never run away from my responsibility again." No one interrupted. Not Diane. Not Victor. Not Summer. It was the only truth that mattered in that moment. The baby stirred again, her tiny fingers curling against his chest, and Kyle's composure shattered. His knees gave out, and he sank into a nearby chair, clutching her close, tears slipping silently down his face. "I should have been there," he whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the universe itself. To the nights he had wasted in bitterness. To the choices he made out of fear. To the version of himself he now hated. He had missed the moment of her birth, missed the first cry, the first breath, the first grasp of her hand. And now, every second he held her, it was like a wound reopening, a reminder of how much time had already been stolen. Summer watched from a few feet away, unmoving. Her face was no longer etched with blame but softened by fatigue. By closure. This was no longer about punishment. It was about honesty. And the honesty was this: Kyle loved their daughter. That was enough. She didn't need an apology carved in grand gestures. She needed him to feel it, to carry it. And now, watching him crumble under the weight of fatherhood, she knew he did. Nick stood behind Summer, his arms slowly wrapping around his daughter's shoulders. His voice was low and steady. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said. And for the first time in what felt like years, Summer leaned into him without resistance. On her other side, Phyllis appeared, eyes red but glowing. She didn't say anything either. She just took Summer's hand and held it tight, as if anchoring her to the moment. Together, they stood like a protective wall around her, family no longer divided by pride or conflict, but bound by something simpler and more permanent. Love for the little girl now nestled in Kyle's arms. The party had long since ceased to be a celebration. The music stopped. The servers had retreated. The guests, many of whom had arrived to revel in the social spectacle of Genoa's elite abroad, now stood as quiet observers of a deeply human unraveling. The scandals, the rivalries, the corporate games, all of it paled compared to the look on Kyle's face as he stared down at his daughter and wept for the time he would never get back. Victor, watching from a distance, said nothing. For once, even he had no strategic thoughts to offer. No suspicion. No move to make. In the presence of that much emotional truth, even a man like him understood silence was the only appropriate response. And so, the ballroom, once filled with ambition and glittering motives, became still. The air heavy, yes, but not with scandal. With something quieter. Deeper. The weight of reunion. The pain of time lost. The fragile joy of second chances. Kyle kissed the top of his daughter's head, held her tighter, and said her name again. Holland. As if saying it made her more real. As if saying it might undo the past. It wouldn't. But it would anchor him to the future. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. Would you like the next part to explore the fallout of Claire's exit, Diane's quiet manipulation behind the scenes, or a confrontation between Audra and Summer? We can also build toward a custody conflict or even a new twist involving Holland's birth records or Victor's secret suspicions. Sally had long learned that when it came to Billy Abbott, resistance was often futile. His stubbornness wasn't just a character flaw, it was the very engine that drove him into wars he couldn't win and alliances he never truly trusted. So when Sally initially tried to talk him out of his fixation on Kane, warning him that pursuing Aristotle Dumas, the man beneath the new name, would lead to dangerous consequences, she was met with that signature defiance, the same look in his eyes that once burned with vengeance against Adam, against Victor, against the world. But this was different. Billy wasn't simply chasing a vendetta. He was following an instinct, one Sally had come to respect, even fear. And so, when her attempts to redirect him failed, she didn't walk away. She joined him. Because the truth was, Billy might be reckless, but he was rarely wrong. The two of them, unlikely allies at best and combustible at worst, set into motion a plan that was equal parts surveillance and seduction. Billy wanted answers. Sally wanted relevance. And Kane, rebranded as Dumas and still circling the power structures of Genoa City and beyond, was the key to both. Thursday's episode would mark a turning point, not just in the investigation, but in the complicated dance of loyalties surrounding it. Billy had always been a man of impulse, but with Sally by his side, those impulses took shape, sharpened into strategy. Together, they weren't just chasing shadows. They were laying traps. Sally found herself walking a line she hadn't crossed in months. Manipulation, once her default mode, had been buried under attempts at redemption. But old habits die hard, and in Billy's world, morality was always negotiable. They staged a run-in with one of Dumas's associates at a wine tasting in Marseilles, posing as eager investors. Billy played the jaded millionaire desperate for a new frontier. Sally leaned into the role of his sharp-tongued PR strategist, equal parts charm and menace. The associate didn't give much away, but he didn't need to. A single name dropped, a business card exchanged, and suddenly they were closer to Kane than they'd been in weeks. What Sally hadn't expected was how comfortable it felt, working the angles, anticipating moves, reading rooms. She and Billy made a formidable team, not just because of their shared ambition, but because they both had nothing left to lose. In Kane, they saw not just a target, but a reflection. A man trying to reinvent himself, to bury the sins of the past under a new name and shinier empire. But the truth, as they both knew, always had a way of clawing itself back to the surface. Back in Genoa City, however, the tone was far more flirtatious than conspiratorial. Audra Charles, never one to let emotional earthquakes rattle her long-term goals, had already pivoted. With Kyle Abbott reeling from the emotional revelation of fatherhood? His daughter with Summer arriving unexpectedly and shaking the very foundation of his life, Audra saw opportunity, not tragedy. She had no interest in becoming Holland's stepmother, but Kyle, vulnerable and aching, was a prize too valuable to abandon. And if nurturing his wounds was the key to securing her influence at Jabot and beyond, she would do so with pleasure. On a sun-drenched terrace outside the Abbott estate, Audra executed her newest strategy with surgical precision. She appeared casual, lounging in a white sundress, sunglasses pushed halfway up her forehead, skin glowing with practiced effortlessness. "You missed a spot," she said teasingly, handing Kyle a bottle of sunscreen and gesturing toward her back. Her voice dripped with innuendo, wrapped in the guise of innocence. Kyle hesitated, visibly caught off guard, not just by the moment, but by how familiar it all felt. Before Summer, before Holland, there had been countless such afternoons. Flirtation without consequence. Attention without depth. He had been addicted to the illusion of being desired, and Audra knew exactly how to recreate it. But something had changed. As Kyle rubbed the lotion onto her shoulder, his movements mechanical, his eyes drifted, not to her curves or her smile, but to the memory of his daughter's face, how she had clutched his finger in the ballroom, how she had instinctively nuzzled into his chest. That moment had rewired something in him. He was no longer simply a man searching for purpose. He was a father now. And everything else felt smaller. Audra noticed the shift but pretended not to. She leaned back, resting against his chest as if nothing had changed. "You're awfully quiet," she whispered, her voice warm. "Still thinking about that little surprise in Paris?" Kyle didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence screamed volumes. Audra felt it like a slap. Her charm, usually so effortless, was bouncing off a wall she hadn't expected, guilt. And guilt, she knew, had the power to derail even the strongest seduction. Still, she didn't retreat. Audra had made her name surviving emotional battlefields like this. And if Kyle needed comfort, she would become comfort. If he needed space, she would wait just close enough to be visible, just far enough to seem unobtrusive. Eventually, he would crack. And when he did, she would be there. Meanwhile, the world around them continued to spin. Sally and Billy uncovered a phone number connected to an old offshore account linked to Chancellor Industries, one that hadn't been used in years, until 2 weeks ago when it was activated again in Paris. A name popped up in the trace, G. Ward. No one on record. But Sally, sharp as ever, remembered a slip from Dumas's associate. "There's always a Ward watching," he had said. The phrase hadn't made sense then. It did now. They were close. Dangerously close. Sally warned Billy not to press too hard. But Billy, energized by the scent of a deeper conspiracy, was already preparing their next move. "Whatever Kane is hiding," he said, "it's about more than just a new identity. It's about the past coming back to claim him. And maybe, claim us too." As the sun set in Genoa City and rose again in Paris, the threads tightened. Kyle held his daughter a little closer that night, even as Audra stood in the hallway outside his door, hoping he'd call her in. He didn't. Claire packed her bags in silence, her goodbye note still sealed on the table, waiting to be discovered. Sally booked 2 tickets to Geneva, the next stop in their chase.